Today, I am here with Dr. Ken Knapton. Ken has a master's degree in strategic IT leadership. He also has a doctorate in big data, and he's an industry veteran that's most recently been the CIO at Progression. Ken, thanks so much for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Indeed, I agree. So Scotty John with KēSTA IT. This is a new format for us. Thank you so much for joining. If you're listening or watching, we appreciate you. Obviously, made the move from LinkedIn Live to this new format. Ken, having said that, we're going to do the questions that I've done with several others in the past. And again, I really appreciate you being here. I think it's pretty obvious based on your accolades and credentials that you're going to be uniquely qualified to answer some of these questions. But let's start from the beginning. What inspired you to pursue a career in technology?
Yeah, I love that question because it's always interesting to look back at how different people got into their careers, right? So, for me, it started in high school. I had just moved to this new place in Florida. I'd gotten into high school. I think it was sophomore at the time. And as I was kind of picking my electives, I saw there was this class called computer or something or another. And I thought, oh, well, that sounds kind of fun. And at the time, I had no idea. Everybody's always asking me, what are you going to do? What are you going to do with your life? What are you going to, I had no idea, right? I'm this high school kid, no idea what I'm going to do. And so I took a class in electrical engineering, and then I took this computer thing. And I like the first day of class, I realized we're going to actually learn how to tell these things what to do. Like the thought had never even occurred to me that someone programs a computer, tells it, what it needs to do. And that idea just was fascinating to me. And very, very quickly, I realized that this is something that I just absolutely love. And so that's where I kind of really started to learn about programming and the logic that goes along with it. I'm a very analytical kind of a thinker, and so programming was just natural for me. And so that year, by the end of that school year, I knew that this is what I was going to be doing with my life. I was going to be involved in computers in one way or another.
Well, and shame on me. I can't recall exactly in reviewing your background what your bachelor's degree was in, but from sophomore year you knew,
Yep.
and then from there to getting that master's in strategic IT leadership. What is your undergrad in?
Yeah, so it was computer science. So I
Yep.
started out as a programmer, and actually, interestingly enough, I landed my first job before I had a degree. And so
Okay.
I started out, I was working for WordPerfect. I started as customer support, moved into testing, and then got into programming. And I thought when I got my job programming at WordPerfect, I'm like, this is it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
going to be at this desk
Right.
at this computer for the rest of my career. This is all I'm going to do, because I absolutely loved programming. I had my headphones on, the lights off, my hands on the keyboard, right, just coding away. And so that's kind of how I started out. And then from there, I kind of worked my way into architecture roles and kind of working with more of the enterprise software. And that's when I kind of worked into the CTO seat. I actually, before I got the master's in strategic IT leadership, I got a master's of business administration as well. And so that's when I kind of realized the CIO seat, that operational side, was where I really wanted to take my career. So I learned a little bit more about operations and infrastructure and databases and all that, and that's how I kind of landed on the CIO track. But started out as a programmer, just absolutely loving it.
Very cool. Very cool. So I could make assumptions all day, but I am curious how you think about your most significant achievements throughout the course of your career. Again, there's quite a bit to choose from just looking at it on paper. But how would you describe those? What are the highlights for you?
Yeah, so a couple of things stand out for me as I look back over my career, and it's I've been around for a while. I've been in the valley here for boy, what going on 30 years now, so it's a long time. But one of the first things that kind of stands out to me early on in my career, I had the opportunity to work on a product called Landesk Virus Protect, and it doesn't sound very exciting, but it was a one of the first things that I actually got to write almost from scratch. I took it over from someone else, but then I ended up rewriting it. And this is when I was just getting into the architecture side of things, and so I really started to get involved across this whole solution. And the uniqueness of that product was that it was an enterprise level virus protection solution. Now, today, that doesn't sound like anything, but back then, the tools that were out there were primarily focused on the consumer, on one machine. And so we built a solution that would allow you to, from an enterprise perspective, initiate scans, get the results back on all the computers in the environment, and Landesk Virus or Landesk Management Suite had remote control and these other things as well. And so it was really groundbreaking at the time.
Very cool.
In fact, I have 3 patents from my time working on Landesk Virus Protect. One of them is on plug and play software and being able to, because one of the things we wanted to do was pull out the virus engine, the antivirus engine, and plug in a different engine, because we were partnering for that. We didn't write that ourselves. We just wrote the UI and the enterprise level capabilities. Anyway, long story short, Intel decided they didn't want to be in that business anymore. So they sold off Landesk Virus Protect, and we ended up selling it to Symantec. They were buying it just for our customer base. And because they didn't have an enterprise solution, they only had a consumer solution. So they just wanted the enterprise customers. But once they dug in, did their due diligence, took a look at the code that I helped to write, they said, "Gee, this is actually better than our stuff." And they rebranded our tool as Symantec Antivirus or Norton Antivirus Corporate Edition.
No.
And
Okay.
that was my code that was sold for years and years. In fact, I would walk into hotels and I would look at the computer in the hotel and I would see the icon that I wrote. I'm like, that's my code right there.
Oh, that's
So
really
that
cool.
was super. That's a fun, that's a fun thing that I get to look back on in my career. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, no doubt. That it, I mean, to your point, as you say, Norton, it's like, oh wow, everybody here that's listening to this will be very familiar. And that's something that you actually wrote. Very cool.
I just wish I got $1 for every every time it was installed. Or even a quarter every time it was
Right.
installed. Just anything.
Right. Yes, indeed. No, it's still very, I'm sure, very gratifying. Just out of curiosity, I'm sure that our technical audience will appreciate getting a little bit into the weeds. But what was it written with? What programming language?
Yeah, so I was writing in C plus back then. And that was the primary for the client side anyway.
Sure.
The server side was all written. We were Intel, so very close here, or I'm sorry, Landesk before it became Intel was very close here with Novell, and so we had all the back end, from the server side there. But all the client stuff on my side was C plus.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Um, all right. So we're gonna switch gears just a little bit here with regard to again thinking about your background and the places that you've been. I'm curious how technology differs depending on the industry, and or if there even really is a difference other than business domain. How do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that also is fascinating because every company, and I've worked at many different companies. I've worked in many different industries. I've been in nonprofit. I've been in high tech. I've been in healthcare. I've been in mortgages. I've worked at a bank, financial services. So I've really spanned, lots of industries. And it's really interesting as I look back, every company that when I started at that company, they all said, "Hey, we're really unique. We are just, what we do is so unique." And as I looked at the technology behind what they were doing, it's like, no, y'all have the same problems. There aren't routers that are written that are set up specifically for, this industry versus that industry. There's no wiring that's different. At the end of the day, it's all ones and zeros, right? That's what it all goes down to. It's just ones and zeros. And so, really, I think that the differences between industries are not as great as people think. And as I've looked at one company versus another, the biggest challenges that they have, they all have technical debt. They're all hampered by decisions that have been made in the past, trying to stay current with whatever is happening in their industry. Now, there are applications that are unique to each industry, but the application level is so high in the tech stack, right? You've got all this stuff underneath that tech stack that you have to keep running from an overall IT perspective. And so the problems that these different companies face, they're all very, very similar. So I think it's interesting, especially when you go look at, you look at job descriptions, right? And you say, hey, we need to hire someone for this. Well, we need someone who has 10 years of experience in our industry,
right?
Because we want someone who knows our industry. I've taken jobs where I didn't know that industry at all, and I learned enough about that industry in the first 60 days, 90 days, that I understood the technology problems they were facing. And then, always learning about the industry and the business and all that is an ongoing thing, but it's just not as it's not as big of an issue, I think, as a lot of people tend to make it.
Well, that's fascinating, especially in my line of work, because
Yeah, I'm sure.
to your point, there are definitely plenty of times where we're asked to go out and find that 10 years of experience in this specific industry. Um, at the risk of sounding too much like a layperson, which I am, when it comes to technical debt, how how often do you decide to continue to layer versus we just need a full blown rewrite? Because I know that the commitment to the latter is so great that there's got to be like, there's got to be a tipping point, it's got to be a lot, right? Before you just say we've got to just start from scratch.
Yeah, so fascinating question. And by the way, the topic of tech debt, how much time do we have?
Yeah.
I can talk for hours on tech debt, because in my opinion, that is probably the most challenging aspect of IT today.
Okay.
Is tech debt. Now, to your question, first of all, you can't fix what you don't measure. And so to even understand that, hey, we have to scrap this and go do the new thing, you have to recognize that the thing you're going to scrap is tech debt. You have to make that conscious understanding. And I think that's a stumbling block for a lot of companies. They don't even recognize what is tech debt and what isn't. And so that's where you have to start. Once you make that determination and you say, look, this thing is a problem. It's holding back our business. We can't make the progress from a business perspective that we want to make because this thing is holding us back. Well, then you have to figure out, what are you going to do with that thing? Are you going to upgrade it? Is it still part of your plan? And so you have to fix whatever the problem is. You have to make it more scalable. You have to improve that solution. Or is the solution to scrap it and go with something, maybe you have a custom developed solution and you're going off the shelf. So these are decisions that you have to make long before you start to figure out, well, when do we scrap this and when do we flip the switch and move from this to this, right?
Sure.
And so I can go on for hours about tech debt, but But these are the things that companies struggle to make those decisions. And so then you can't even get to the point of saying, well, how long do we live with this until we move to this? Because do you know you need to move? Right? You have to make those strategic IT decisions first. And then to finally get to answering your question, it really depends, which is the worst answer, right? But it's always the answer. It depends.
Sure, of course.
Because at some point, you're going to flip the switch. At some point, you're going to say, this is now dead. This is the new world. But you can run the two often. You can run the two in parallel. You're building this while you're still operating this. You're not, I don't think it's very common that you're going to say, we need to scrap this and just start over.
Sure.
Right? Because you have to have something that you're using for that. Theoretically, this piece of technical debt is some critical functionality for your business.
Sure.
So you can start building this. And so I've done that many times in my career where we know that this particular thing, and so one that comes to mind, I was working at the mortgage company, and our custom developed solution was literally hampering the business. Like every day between 9 or 10 o'clock in the morning, the system would start to slow down because people across the country were starting to get in, they were getting on the system and it was getting overloaded. And I would get a phone call from the CEO. Hey, Ken, why are our systems slow? Well, the same reason they were slow yesterday. The same, it's this is the problem that we have with this custom developed solution. Now, there were two options. One, go with an off-the-shelf solution and get rid of the custom developed, or two, fix the custom developed solution. Well, again, there's a long story here. I'll keep it short. But what we ended up deciding was the immediate fix was to fix the custom developed solution. And to do that, the root cause was the underlying database. The database itself was not scalable. And so we had to replace the database. So we continued to fix as much as we could. We continued to tweak and work on this custom solution every day, right? Pulling out, trying to optimize queries, getting people off the system that weren't using it, doing all those things that would keep it running. While at the same time, I had a very small team of engineers building out this new database and creating this solution so that at some point, and it took us, if I remember correctly, 5 months, 4 or 5 months, but we finally got to the point where this was now ready. Literally overnight, we flipped the switch, we moved this over to the new database, and the next morning, everything was working. And of course, my boss called me up and said, how come you didn't do that sooner?
Yeah. Oh, and I think, you could talk about tech debt. I have so many just naturally, I've got a natural curiosity when it comes to so much of what you said, but
Yeah.
we'll be here for, 3 hours if we
I can go on. Yeah.
yeah, if we go down the rabbit hole. That said, I feel like it's probably a good segue to some of the next questions I want to ask you, because it seems like so much of what you talked about with regard to the challenges that companies face from a technology perspective seems to come back to change management, and
Oh,
that seems to
yes.
come back to leadership.
Yep.
So, your background, not just academic, but in practice, is a leader, and I have it on good authority from multiple people in my network that you're one of the best they've ever reported to.
Oh, well, thank you.
Um, you're welcome. It's true. So I guess what I'm curious about is how you balance the technical expertise that you possess with the leadership, the business acumen, and the change management aspect of the role.
Yeah, change management is certainly absolutely critical. You have to get everyone on the same page. They have to understand, where are we headed and why,
Mhm.
right? Why are we going there? And that's one of the biggest parts of change management, because if people don't understand why, then they're not gonna get on the bus. So change management is a very human, it's a very human thing, right? It's like I said, I'm very analytical. I'm really good with computers because I can tell it do this, 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 and it's going to do this, 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 right? Humans aren't that way. And so, I've always said that IT folks, engineers, want a problem to solve, not a solution to implement.
Hmm.
So if you're leading your teams, and even from a business perspective, not just from the IT perspective, but from the business perspective, if you're leading that organization from the perspective of, we have to have a very small set of people solve all of our problems and then give those solutions to IT to go implement,
Hmm.
then you're setting your company up for failure. And that's how a lot of companies run, right? We've got people in departments that maybe, maybe they're doing this out of from a positive perspective, I guess, saying, hey, we don't want to bother IT because they're so busy, so we're going to go figure out what we want. And once we figure out what we want and we get the vendor that we want to do it with, and we know we have a good plan, then we'll pull in IT and we'll just tell them to go implement this thing. Look, we've got it solved. Go do this. That's a recipe for failure. And that change management is not going to function. That's not going to work. So from a change management perspective, you have to get everyone everybody on the bus. And the way you do that is you involve them in the solution, not in the implementation.
Wow. So I very much appreciate the Jim Collins reference there. Get them on
Yeah,
the bus in the
yeah,
right seat.
yeah,
Um, but that's fascinating to me because I don't know that I've ever heard anybody quite put it that way. And it makes perfect sense with regard to, technical people wanting to solve problems and not just implement solutions, not be dictated to. I guess so it begs the question, the follow-up question is, for you, when you come in and you're assessing an organization and determining how best to um, try to implement that aspect of change management, and this actually will this is going to relate to a question I had planned to ask a little later, but
okay,
how do you get to that place? Who do you need to convince? Generally speaking, I suppose it's probably different depending on the organization. But what's the game plan for? Because I do think that for me, like that's a light bulb moment. I'm sure that you've had that happen with other people in your
yeah.
career where they're like, "Oh, well, that makes sense." How do you do it? What are the steps to get there?
Yeah, that really is the CIO's job. That is my role. My role is to help ensure that my peers understand how to be successful in getting stuff done with IT, right?
Sure.
And so my role is to help them understand exactly what we just talked about. Right? Don't come to my folks with a solution
Hmm.
and ask them to implement it. Bring them in early on, and I have to help them understand why.
Yeah.
Now, as to how to do that, right? Um, One, I have to understand the business that we're in. How do we make money? And I have to make sure that my people understand that,
Mm,
because they can't help create a solution if they don't understand how we make money. Fundamentally, what drives the engine of this particular company. And
sure.
so that's critical. Something else that I do kind of everywhere I go, uh, I try to root out this concept of IT and the business.
Okay.
And everywhere I go, I hear that, right? As soon as I come into to the organization, I hear all the IT people talking about, well, the business wants this, or the business is asking that, or the business. And I say, look, stop. You are the business.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? IT
Sure.
is part of the business. So if you talk about IT and the business, you're creating this separation that is part of the problem. And so I work with my peers to help them understand that as well. Don't talk about IT as a separate thing from your part of the business. We are part of your business. We're all part of whatever the engine is that keeps this company running. We're all part of it. And until we have that symbiotic kind of view, the problems are going to continue to persist. So that's, like I said, that's my role, right? My role is to help ensure those things happen, and then get the right people in the rooms, and then I get out of the way. Let them go solve the problems. Let them go, do what they're going to do.
Yeah. No, it makes sense. But it's one of those, like many things in life, one of those things that are simple but not easy, right?
Oh yeah, for sure. It's ingrained. Again, this is ubiquitous. Every place I go, I hear people talking about the business. You are the business,
Yeah.
right? Don't talk about the business. And in fact, I was at a company not too long ago where I sat down, one of the early, I was just coming into the business, one of my early kind of interviews with the folks, and I was talking to someone who is in the business, and he was telling me, well, the business wants us to do this or that. I said, wait, aren't you the business? Like, aren't you? You're in marketing, isn't that the business? Like, what if you're not the business? What is the business, right? So people use that term, the business, not just to talk about IT and the business, but other departments talk about it as well. It's like it's this nebulous thing out here
Sure.
that drives all of these decisions that we're not part of. The business wants us to do this. Well, we're all part of that. So just cut that from your vocabulary.
I love it. That's really cool. Okay. Yeah. And so, the next question I had planned to ask
Yeah.
was how to prioritize and manage competing demands for your team's time and resources. I think, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that question, but I think I know half the answer already, right?
Yeah,
It's
go ahead.
well,
What's happening?
you got it to your point. You have to start by making sure that everybody recognizes that we are all the business. We understand what drives the business, and that kind of naturally will tell you what the priority is. What the priority is, what's going to drive the business most, right? Is that fair to say? I don't want to certainly don't want to speak for you, but
Spot on. That is exactly what I would have said. That is the answer, right? So when you talk about prioritizing, how do you prioritize? That's exactly it. You have to start with what drives revenue. And I'm an agile fanatic. Like I really believe in the agile process. And that is what drives the agile process. What drives our revenue? What is the problem, the one problem that we have to solve right now? What's the most important thing right now? That becomes what you go focus on.
sure.
And then you do it again. Right? Okay, we solved that one. What's the next most important thing right now? That's our MVP. Go build it. Go fix it. Go solve it.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. And again, I don't know that I've ever, and perhaps it's the product of not speaking with as many CIOs or C-level technology leaders. Though I will say, I think it just is not. It's not. It seems almost like a novel idea, and it makes perfect sense. So yeah, okay. I This next question to me is a little more difficult because I often think that risk in a
Mhm.
lot of ways, when I think risk, being in the recruiting space, the first thing that comes to mind is HR. Obviously, we're talking about technical risk, but oftentimes risk seems a little bit at odds with how the business can move quickly and make money and drive revenue. How do you assess and manage risk in technical projects? And is there a tension there, or am I missing on that?
Well, I think you're spot on that everything carries risk, right? Everything, every decision we make, every prioritization that we make, every feature that we want to build, there's risk. The question is how much, and where is the risk? Is the risk to the time frame? Is the risk to what it could break because of your fragile tech debt? Is the risk to alienating customers? Is the risk uh, to attrition, right? Losing employees. So there's risk always. And so the key is to make sure you understand what is the risk.
Sure.
And so you constantly have to be assessing risk. Now, I come from a very, for whatever reason, I have found myself in highly regulated industries. And so we have formal risk review processes to review every vendor from a risk perspective. What's the risk that this vendor is not going to deliver for us, or what's the risk that they're going to go out of business, or that they're going to raise their prices, or whatever. So we do these risk assessments on every vendor. And so for me, assessing risk is just a natural thing to do. And so I think, again, as you prioritize, as you look at what's the biggest problem that this company is facing right now, what do we need? So we're going to go tackle that problem. As part of that prioritization, you have to be including the risks around that. And sometimes they're opportunity costs, right? The risk is an opportunity cost of not doing this other thing because we're doing this.
Okay.
And so again, for me, it just becomes part of the natural cadence of evaluating what the team is working on. You're constantly looking at the risks. Are you involving a new vendor you haven't worked with before? Is the vendor having some financial problems? So you're looking at all those things as you're trying to figure out, where do we need to focus our efforts?
Makes sense. Okay. Yeah. And to your point, there will be risk always.
Yeah.
You want to try to mitigate what you can, but at some point you have to take some risks, right?
Yeah,
Obviously.
that's right. There's always risk. The question is, sometimes the risk is minimal and sometimes the risk is large. And
Sure.
even with the large risks, sometimes, as long as you know what the risk is, you still want to go down that path, because that large risk is still a good trade-off. But it's just like tech debt. It's when you don't measure it, then that's when you run into problems, right? If you're making a conscious decision that, yes, there's some risk here, but we're accepting that risk and we're moving forward because we think we can mitigate it, great, right? The fact that there's a lot of risk shouldn't prohibit you from going down that path.
Very good. Okay. Makes sense. So still keeping in, with the theme of leadership, with
Sure.
technical leadership,
Yeah.
I'm curious how you approach leading the team and managing people.
Yeah, that's a very broad question, right? I think some of the things that I try to do, and we've talked about some of these already. I try to remove roadblocks. I try to establish the right relationships of the people working for me, and then get out of their way.
Hmm.
Right? I feel like my role is to make sure the right people are thinking about the right things. And that all comes down to prioritization. So as long as we have the right people thinking about the right things, then my job is to stay out of their way and let them do what they do. And if they run into problems, then they come to me and say, hey, we've got this problem, we've got this roadblock, we've got, whatever it is, and I can help solve it. But my job is to be looking 6 or 12 months down the road as to where do we need to be, because I'm assuming that my team is working on the today stuff. They've got today down. I need to figure out, when they're done with today's priority, what's the next one, right? What's the next thing they need to be working on? And so that's how I lead my teams, is I'm trying to look down the road while getting out of their way for them fixing the today stuff.
That makes sense. I mean, to be clear, at your level, at the C level, you've got executive leaders reporting to you that you want to give the autonomy to lead, in all likelihood, additional leaders who are then leading individual contributors, depending on how flat an organization is. Okay,
Sure.
that makes sense. Again, one of those topics we could talk about for way longer than we necessarily need to here.
Yeah. Yep.
With regard to growing leaders, for aspiring leaders, whether they're on your team or just someone listening to this today, what guidance would you offer to help them advance their career?
Yeah. So I think, like we've talked about before, understanding the engine that drives their business is critical. And it doesn't matter where you sit in the organization, you have to understand how your company makes money. And so understanding what drives the business is super critical. I also would say, um, oftentimes IT people, and I was guilty of this early in my career, tend to undervalue relationships with other people.
Mm.
Like I said, when I got my programming job, I had my headphones on, my lights off, my hands on the keyboard, right? It was me and the computer. That was it. And I didn't want to talk to anybody, right? I wanted to come to work and deal with the computer. Um, but talking to people, building those relationships, both in IT and outside of IT, that is super critical. Um, and so that would be my advice to people who want to kind of spread their wings a little bit and grow and develop in the leadership roles. You have to build those soft skills that allow you to interact and talk in non-technical terms that people can understand. Make sure you can translate the very technical stuff that you're working on to someone who's not technical without talking down to them or making them feel dumb because they don't understand technology. It's not our job to teach everybody technology. It's not our job to make sure everybody understands how everything runs, right? It's our job to help them understand how it solves problems.
Right.
So speak in those terms. Right. And I think that's a big challenge for IT folks.
So, if you allow me just to linger on this
Sure.
point, because we did, and again, the nature of a relatively short form interview, you're going to gloss over things. You've got a,
Yeah.
30-year career. It's hard to summarize in 30 or 40 minutes. I'm curious what was, because you've mentioned it a couple of times, right? That programming job was it for you, but you got a master's degree in strategic IT leadership. You're a CIO, you're a people leader. Again, not to pump your tires too much here, but I have heard from many people in this market, you're one of the best leaders they've ever reported to. What changed for you to go from that, programming is it to where you are today, the leader that you
Yeah.
are?
Yeah. I remember very specifically that decision point in my career. And I was working at Intel at the time, and I'm really grateful that I was there, because Intel, they have said that they don't make chips, they make leaders. That's what Intel says. And I was really grateful to be working there at the time, because that's when I was still really technical. I was leading a team, but I had my hands in the code. I was coding. I was a hands-on kind of a leader. And so I wasn't really, I hadn't really made the move totally into the management track. I was still very heavy into architecture, design, and even had some development tasks of my own that I was working on. And I remember um, getting to this point. The way I got there was because I started down that architecture path, because I was good at what I did. I was a good developer, and because I was good at that, I was starting to people were starting to come to me and ask me questions about, well, how should I solve this problem? Can I get your thoughts on this? And that's when I started moving into the architecture role, and kind of spreading my influence a little bit more. But I was still very much on the technical track. And at Intel, they have job ladders, and there again, there's a very clear kind of diverging of,
Mhm.
if you stay on the technical track, you're going to become a fellow, and you're going to be very technical, but you're not going to lead people. Or if you're going to be a people leader, then you're going to lead people, and you're not necessarily going to be coding anymore and doing that. And I remember having to make that decision. It was a difficult one for me. And there have been times in my career where I've looked back and I've thought, maybe I made the wrong decision. Maybe I really miss coding. I wish I could still do that. But for me, it was an inflection point. And I remember sitting down with my manager and talking about that and saying, well, I love technology. I love coding and solving problems. Should I stay there or should I go down this path? And yeah, I just decided that I really like interacting with people, and I liked it more than I thought I did. I actually like to talk to people more than I thought I would.
Okay.
And so that's when I kind of made that specific decision. And then so that was one inflection point. The next one, that got me on the leadership path, and I became a CTO. I was at a couple of startups, but I was still very heavy in the technology. And I remember as CTO, a sales guy coming to me and saying, "Hey, what system should we use for our CRM?" I'm like, "Why are you asking me? I'm building the stuff we're selling. I don't care what you use." But as the CTO, they come to you for everything technical, right? And that's when I started to realize, wait a minute, I need to understand more about operations. I need to understand more about how business operates. And that's when I decided to go get my MBA and kind of start going down that path. So
Okay.
that's kind of how those two inflection points for me.
Yep. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah,
Just a couple more questions here. We talked about a lot of this, I'm sure already, but just to put a fine point on it,
sure.
when it comes to interacting with the rest of the C-suite as the CIO or the CTO, what attributes do you think are essential for a technology executive to possess in order to be, the most successful CIO or CTO in the eyes of the rest of the C-suite?
Well, I said earlier that we don't really have to have 10 years of experience in a specific industry in order to work in that industry. And I firmly believe that. However, in order to gain credibility among the executive staff, you have to understand the industry and you have to understand that business. You have to understand the engine that drives the business.
Mhm.
Um, if you're just seen as the tech guy,
Mm.
then you're going to be, even in around the executive table, you're going to be the guy that they only talk to after they think they've come up with a solution and they want to get somebody to go implement it. Right? So you have to be involved in the discussions around revenue, what's driving our revenue, what's holding us back from a business perspective, what are our competitors doing, what are the competitive challenges that we have, what are the barriers to entry to certain new areas of the business that we want to go into. So you have to elevate your communication to that level, because if all you're ever talking about is the tech debt and what's holding us back and the technical solutions, you're not going to be involved in the right conversations.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay. And then the last question that I have today, are there resources that you recommend with regard to, I mean, it could be anything, books, newsletters that you recommend people sign up for, but any kind of resources that you would recommend that make a significant impact on your approach to technology or leadership, something to share for others to get some benefit from.
Yeah, I certainly think it's important to stay current, however you do that. And each role is going to be different. But if you're InfoSec, if you're a DBA, if you're a developer, wherever you are in system administrator, um, your specialty is going to be different. And so how you stay current on that specialty. If you're a Salesforce admin, then make sure you're staying current with what Salesforce is doing and staying aware of the changes and what they're working on. So I think it depends a lot on your specific area, right?
Sure.
And it's going to be different based on what you're doing. From a leadership perspective, I actually I have a seminar that I give. I've given at a couple of conferences, and I give it here locally as part of the AIM Association. I teach this class called Unlearning Leadership. And in that, I talk about how we have to be constantly learning and then unlearning, right? Especially from a leadership perspective, we have to be able to throw away some of our old biases, some of our old thoughts that, hey, this is how we do things. Well, maybe that's not how we do things anymore. Maybe things have shifted a little bit. And so I think having that willingness to be able to set aside some of your, sacred cows, for lack of a better term, I think that's super important. Um, and for me, in that unlearning leadership, I talk about 6 books that I've read over the course of my career that have really kind of directed, my leadership. Now they may not be the same for everyone else, right? But I think you have to have that foundational. What are the things that have helped you to create your mindset around how to lead and how to do your job? So there you go. Those are the things that I think are important.
Can you talk a little bit about AIM and about the next time? I guess is the seminar, is it open to anyone, or do you have to be can you just talk a little bit about how people can sign up, or if
Yeah,
anyone's
sure.
interested,
So
how they could actually partake in that?
yeah, no, I'd love to. So I've been on the board of our local AIM chapter. It's called AIM Utah. The website is aimutah.org. Um, and so there's lots of things offered for members. You can become a member of AIM. Anyone can be a member. You don't have to be a CIO. I specifically lead the CIO roundtables, and so that is the group that's focused just on the CIOs. But AIM itself has programs that go beyond that. One of the things that we established years ago, in fact, I think I was one of the very first people to go through this program when it was first established. Um, it's called LDI, the Leadership Development Institute, and LDI is offered twice a year. It's 4 sessions, and they're all-day sessions. So it's the first Friday of each month.
Hmm.
I think we start in February and September. I think that's the beginning. And so it's the first Friday of each month, all-day session, and you learn from local successful CIOs. And so we each come in and teach. I teach one of the sections there. Again, mine is called Unlearning Leadership, but we have other CIOs that come in and teach an hour or so session in each of these four classes. And anyone can join. So you don't have to join AIM to do it. You go to aimutah.org, you go to the events. Like I said, twice a year, it's available, and you can sign up. It's $1,000 for the whole program, which is super cheap when you're looking at leadership development and things like that. So
Heck, a
yeah,
lot cheaper than
thanks
an
for
MBA.
letting me put a plug in there. It's a great program. Like I said, I was one of the first to go through it, and now I'm one of the instructors there.
Very cool. Yeah, no, my pleasure. Yeah, and again, I'd encourage anyone listening that's interested to go check it out. I'm certainly gonna go check it out myself. Um, Ken, is there anything we missed today? I mean, again, we could talk for a long time on many of these topics that we just touched on, but is there anything that you think that we didn't cover that would be important to share? Anything at all?
Boy, I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. This has been a really fun discussion. Um, so no, I don't think there's anything that we missed. Like I said, I could go on for another 45 minutes or so just talking about tech debt, but we'll forego that. Uh,
Maybe next time.
yeah, tech debt, big data, privacy. Those are the 3 things that you get me talking on any of those, and boy, all bets are off.
Very good, very good. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you being here. Again, thanks to any of you that are out there listening or watching, I should say. And yeah, we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks so much. It was a lot of fun.